think I'm unusual. When I look back at my life and I see how God has been watching over me, you know, and I think we can all look back and say the same thing. But for me, it's pretty profound, because on April 26, 1967, that's the same day that a guy named Cassius Clay was drafted, later became Muhammad Ali. I was drafted the same day. He was in Louisville, I was in Cleveland. Ended up going to Fort Benning, Georgia, where I did infantry training for 8 weeks. Something happened in the 6th week that changed my life, that convinced me that God indeed was watching over me. I got an infection in my right Achilles, and I went to my sergeant and said, I'm having trouble walking, I can't even walk, it's swelling up, I think it's getting infected. And he said, oh, tough it out. Well, a couple days later, it was swollen so big I couldn't get the boot on. So they reluctantly sent me to the dispensary. I spent about 6 days there with my leg elevated and putting in antibiotics. And finally, when I came back to my platoon, they were a week ahead of me. They had qualified on the rifle range while I was gone, and so I was out of sequence. So I was kind of held back. And so at the end of that 8-week period of time, all of my guys in my platoon were sent to Fort Polk, Louisiana for pre-Vietnam training. I, a week later, was sent to Fort Dix with a couple other stragglers in New Jersey. And from there I was sent to Germany. I was in West Berlin. It was a spit-shine, pick up cigarette butts, do nothing army. I was on the back of a 106 recoilless rifle Jeep, and when the guy turned right, I had to lean left. We were supposed to do maintenance on this gun. It was so big that we couldn't do it. We couldn't fire it ever in West Berlin. So it seemed after a while that this was a do-nothing army. And one day, my buddy Robert Quick and I were sitting up there in the platoon room in the barracks, and he said, you know, we were trained as infantrymen. Man, we went through AIT training, and here we are picking up cigarette butts, doing nothing. He says, I'm going to volunteer to go to Vietnam. And I said, yeah, Robert, you're right. I should do that. I'm going to write a letter to my parents and tell them what I'm doing. And I went down the next day, and I got this 1049 change of duty status. Robert got his. We both filled them out. I sat down and I wrote this letter. I still remember it. It was in green pen. It was about 6 pages long. Dear Mom and Dad, the essence of it was why I'm going to Vietnam. I'm going to be a real soldier doing the real things that all those guys do. And so I didn't seal the envelope. I just put it in my locker. The next day I got up and I read it. And I thought, Rich, that is the stupidest thing I've ever seen you do. And so I ripped it up. Never even told my parents about it. Robert Quick went on to volunteer. Fast forward. Oh, by the way, about 3 months later, I found out I could apply. I applied for a job as a chaplain's assistant. So my last year, I went from PFC to Spec 5 and worked for the Catholic chaplain of Berlin Brigade. Okay, I got out as a Spec 5 in 2 years. Some people tell me that that's pretty good. The point is, 20 years later, I met the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C., and I'm thinking, I've never known what happened to Robert Quick. And I'm walking along, and they have it divided by time. And so you can see in the spring of 1968, I'm looking. And there is his name on the wall. And it's just one of those times that I'm thinking that God was watching. The infection in my boot, ripping up the letter. And so I'm thinking it's all done. all of a sudden, about 10 years ago, I find out the moving wall is coming to Great Falls. And I thought, oh, it can't be identical. So about 2 in the morning on a Saturday morning, I went down and walked along the wall, saw little flowers and things that people were putting in front. And I thought, I went over there and sat down, they had a picnic table, and I wrote a note to Robert Quick. And I put it under where he was and said some prayers. And then about 4 days later, I'm in Hardee's. I pick up the Great Falls Tribune and I flip over on the back side, and there's a picture of my note that I wrote to Robert Quick on the front page of the Great Falls Tribune. I had two feelings in my mind. One was, this is an invasion of my privacy. And the other feeling was, what have I got to hide? You know, I just wrote to Robert saying, Robert, you had courage of your convictions. You followed through with what was sincerely in your heart, and I admire you for that kind of courage, something that I did not have at the time. I will pray for you. God bless you. And there it was on the front page of the Tribune. And it's just another example of, as a reluctant patriot, God was watching over me. And I'm sure he's right here, Robert.